On today's last stop for the Xenoblade Marathon, we cover the series' very own black sheep, Xenoblade Chronicles X, a game that I very unfairly judged back when it first came out. Back in 2015, I didn't like that the game wasn't anything like the original, and unfairly judged it as bad for the game being something it just wasn't. I didn't like the lack of focus on the story or the main cast, and I thought the player character was unnecessary. Revisiting the game now though, while I still feel a few of my criticisms still stand, I can appreciate what the game was actually trying to be, an open-world RPG about helping the remnants of humanity move on from a great tragedy. Xenoblade X has actually become my new second favorite game in the series, despite some of its issues, and it has some fantastic world building and probably the most incredible world design I've seen in an open world game. Honestly, after playing Xenoblade 3 and being left unsatisfied by it for a few unfortunate reasons, I was not expecting my least favorite in the series to be the one to fill the hole 3 left me with. After much longer than I expected, it's finally time to take a look at the black sheep in the Xenoblade series that deserves way more love. Let's get started. Two years before the events of the main game, planet Earth was caught up in a fight between two alien factions, the enigmatic Ghosts and the Ganglion, a crime syndicate subsidiary of the Samar Federation. With weapons far surpassing anything Earth has, humanity's only hope for survival was to retreat to the stars on a myriad of ships in hopes that at least one of them would be able to make their way to a new planet to call home after the destruction of Earth. In the present, one of those ships, the White Whale, crash-landed on the planet Mira after an attack by the Ghost faction. 2 months after the crash, the game's protagonist Elma wakes up a survivor in stasis, that survivor being you, the player. For the first and currently only time in the series, we get to make our own character, and while I normally would go with a guy character, I figured I'd go with something a bit different and make a girl this time around. Canonically, they're called Cross, but for this video I'll be referring to them as Bryn. I kinda wish there was some more options for customization though. I would have loved to give Bryn here a badass anime ponytail, but hey, at least I can give her a cool scar. I'm gonna be honest here, when I first played this game back in 2015, I didn't like how the player character wasn't that relevant to the story, but now that I think about it, I'm mostly okay with how it was implemented. Bryn exists as a way to give the player a stronger connection to the world, and help immerse them in the beautiful world of Mira. And while the main story isn't about you, that was never really the point. Like I said before, Elma is more of the actual protagonist, with you helping out, and even then, while the main story is important, it's not really the focus or the entire point of the game. As a member of Blade, an organization dedicated to helping keep peace and protecting the people of New Los Angeles, your job is to help everyone in any way you can, as shown in the game's many side quests. Xenoblade X's story content is only like 10 to 15% of the actual game, with the vast majority of it being the many side quests and affinity missions. As a member of Blade, your role is to protect N.L.A. from Mira's many dangerous inhabitants, as well as assist the citizens in their daily lives. And honestly, I think Xenoblade X has the best side content in the series. You have your normal fetch quests and kill X number of thing quests in the game's basic missions, but the normal and affinity missions are much more than that. Every one of the normal side quests I played through had some kind of interesting story behind them, and in some cases they were even part of a quest chain, and a lot of them actually managed to meaningfully develop the quest giver in a really nice way. From the ones I did, some of my favorites were the Sword of Legendariness questline, for its very appreciated callback to the first game, and the 2 quests that involve the attack on the Briono water plant. Like, if I'm gonna be real with you for a sec, the first quest in this chain, and just the side quest in general, really caught me off guard with how dark they could get. This whole thing starts off with some lady wanting you to give her coworkers a piece of her mind after some drama or something happens, and when you get there, you find a whole bunch of cocoons containing these 4-armed monsters. You then eventually discover the workers functionally got wasped, if you know you know, after an encounter with an Indian, and those monsters were the quest givers, coworkers, and friends that you now need to put down. Then there was this one involving the cult. The basic setup here is that one of the game's many alien races, the Manon, are mysteriously getting sick, and can only be cured by this miracle potion being peddled by this lady and her Manon partner. After being asked by another Manon to investigate, you find that the lady's partner has been dumping a special poison in the water supply to affect the local population and make a quick buck. After being confronted though, her partner, instead of going quietly, chugs the bottle and literally commits suicide on screen. No other moment in this entire series has caught me more off guard than this, and none of this is even getting into how great the world building in these are. Of the 6 recruitable alien races to join N.L.A., 5 of them are totally optional, and they all have their own big set of side quests that you can do. My favorites were the Orpheans and the Tree Clan Prone. The Orpheans were really cool, purely for how interesting they are as creatures. Unlike other sentient races, they reproduce asexually using their ova, basically a virus they're in a symbiotic relationship with that allows them to split their minds and body into two separate organisms when exposed to Senripa water. The Tree Clan Prone were really cool for a totally different reason though. You see, you meet the Prone early on in the game as a race of goons under the control of the Ganglion. We find out though that those guys are the more murder-happy Cavern Clan, and they joined the Ganglion to subjugate the more peaceful but still warrior-like Tree Clan. There is so much good in how well Chronicles X handles its world building, and I didn't even do half the quests in the game. I can only imagine what else there is to see and learn about this world. Xenoblade X's side quests are so good that, in my opinion, it almost makes up for the game's main story. What I feel makes this extra content in Xenoblade X even more interesting, though, is the fact that a lot of the game's characters are optional, and even for party members you're required to recruit, their development is handled in all of the game's side quests and affinity missions. All of these help to make Xenoblade X feel like a kind of episodic sci-fi anime, and I really liked that. It's a feeling I don't get from many sci-fi RPGs. Now, comparatively, I didn't do as much of the side quests involving the other characters as I did the game's various races, so I'll reserve any judgments I have for them, but from what I have played, I really liked these guys, and if I played this on my own time, I'd probably love some of them. Beyond how Xenoblade X handles its story and side quests, though, there are two things about it that even back then, when I had my very wrong opinion about the game, I easily loved more than Xenoblade 1. Its combat and exploration. Outside of helping people, your other job as a Blade is to explore the world of Mira, expanding frontier nav and defeating any indigene or hostile alien that threatens N.L.A. Starting with that first point, let's talk about how Xenoblade X uses the Wii U's gamepad. While exploring any of the game's 5 main regions, you'll come across beams of light where you can install a probe that expands frontier nav. In universe, it's a network that collects data about, well, basically everything about the planet. For you, the player, though, it serves as both your map and your way of getting extra money, a resource called Miranium, and special resources you can only get from mining probes. For every new probe you install, it'll fill out a few segments on the gamepad's map, and will show you an icon for each segment indicating what you have to do to complete its task, and get a higher survey rate for the region and Mira as a whole. These can include finding things in the field, to getting stuff from using one of the game's 3 field skills, killing one of Mira's many tyrants, basically Xenoblade X's unique monsters, or even just doing a side quest of some kind. Also, on a sort of related note, can I just say that the tyrant theme Uncontrollable is the best unique monster theme in the series? It makes fighting the tyrants feel really good in a way that the other themes just don't for me. I know this might be an unpopular opinion, but I love this game's soundtrack as a whole. It's really good. I think this is probably one of my new favorite open worlds. Mira is gorgeous, and every region is visually interesting in some way. Primordia is probably the best opening plains area the series has ever seen, with a great variety of different enemies and smaller areas to help the player get familiar with the game. Noctilum is a gorgeous jungle marsh area that, for as little story as the game has, features some great moments. I love how varied the environments in Oblivia are, and the various rings dotting the landscape really helped it to stand out. For as cool as Sylvalum is, I'm not even sure how to describe it in any other way except interesting. Oh, and whoever thought the weather in Sylvalum should be this obnoxiously thick fog should get a very stern talking to, because I can't see anything in this and I don't know who thought this was a good idea. Kaldros is probably my least favorite. It's not bad at all. Areas like the castle and White Phosphorus Lake are really cool, but beyond that, it's kind of just that lava area the villains live in. Now before we go any further, let me ask you a question. In this entire series, what is the greatest ability shown? Is it Shulk's ability to see the future? No. Is it Mithra's ability to fire a near-light-speed space laser? No. Is it Noah's ability to flute toot lost souls into the afterlife? No. And I'm very confused why out of everything from 3 you could have picked, you chose that one. The strongest one shown is the people of Mira's ability to look Sir Isaac Newton square in the eyes and say, "Snuff you and your laws of physics, nerd! Here on the planet Mira, my bones are unbreakable!" Yeah, in Xenoblade Chronicles X, you don't take fall damage, and it's kind of weird and awesome. People treat the local wildlife as though it's a problem, but their immunity to gravity suggests it should be the indigens that are concerned. By the way, I gotta say, this game made me realize how much I miss the Collectopedia. It's implemented really well in this game, and it was great to have a nice little checklist of sorts to fill in over the course of the adventure. It kinda makes me wish Xenoblade 3 had this instead of its Collectopedia cards. Hopefully this returns in a later game. The best thing about exploration though, and the thing that leads us into the combat portion of this part of the video, is the game's skells. When you first unlock them, they just serve as a way to help you get around faster, and maybe access one or two locations as well as act as a new way of fighting. The second you unlock the flight module though, it's like the game opens up to you a second time. The view from Mira's skies is absolutely stunning and makes what was already a big game even bigger, since now you can reach areas easier and even get to places you otherwise couldn't. Before talking about how skells work in combat though, we need to talk about how normal gameplay works, because if I'm gonna be honest with you, a few tweaks in a future game and we could easily have one of my new favorite combat systems in the series. On the surface, ground combat seems similar to Xenoblade 1, but delve a little deeper and you'll find that X is a very different beast from its predecessor. The biggest difference is how healing works. While healing arts do exist, they all kind of suck, so your main method of healing you and the party will come from the soul voices, commands that you and another party member can give that will give certain colored arts for other people a bonus effect for a short period of time, and even heal you as well as the rest of the party. Triggering a soul voice will require you and another character to meet certain conditions in combat, and you can even customize what effect a certain soul voice will give that colored art. I love the soul voices in this. It allows the game a nice level of challenge and gives you something to keep you engaged during combat, something that Xenoblade 1's gameplay doesn't really accomplish for me. Adding on to this is the ability to target an enemy's various limbs and break them to not only disable some of their attacks, but to also let you get some special drops from them. I will say though, it can be a smidge bit finicky at points. Like, there was one quest where I needed to get honey oil from the fleshy part under a Senicula's horn, but I couldn't target it because I needed to break its legs since the reticle couldn't focus on the head. This caused me to kill the Senicula too fast, so I then spent an hour killing them with the weakest weapons possible to finally get the drop. Please, Monolith, on the lottery winning level chances you're watching this, make the targeting reticle more cooperable in the definitive edition. Unique to the player character though are two mechanics, your classes and overdrive. Classes are exactly what they sound like. You have a grand total of 16 classes to master, each one specializing in 2 different weapons, each with their own arts attached to them. When you max out a class, you can even mix and match that class's weapons and arts with another's in the Drifter class, allowing for some incredible customization for the player character. Unfortunately though, every other party member in the game only has access to one class, and while they're definitely not lacking in usable arts and class-specific skills, it does make them feel less overall powerful in comparison, especially when you factor in overdrive. Now, I never mastered it to show off its god status for this video, but when you know how to use it, overdrive is pretty overpowered. It's a little too complicated to get into here, but let's just say that the game, similarly to Xenoblade 2, doesn't exactly have great tutorials, and you'll need a guide to fully understand it. Credit where credit's due though, at least in X I can review the tutorials, and they're not incredibly handholdy like Xenoblade 3's, so they are, in my understandably very unpopular opinion, objectively the series' best tutorials. By the way, aside from more in-depth tutorials, for this game's eventual definitive edition, I would love to have a much faster way of swapping out party members, because as it currently stands, you have to go out and find the character to bring them along, and you have to do this for every party member you want to change. Similarly, I would also like the option to change time whenever I want in the menu, like the other games. I honestly don't see why this wasn't here in the first place. Finally, moving on to scale combat, I love how it feels. There's something about fighting a big monster with a group of giant robots that just feels so cool, especially when you get to name and customize them for yourself. For this playthrough, we got Brynn on Siren, Lynn on Sybzin, Elma on Weltall, and Nagi on Fenrir. Can you guess what my 2 favorite games of this series are? In combat, a skill's arts are determined based on what you have equipped to it, adding a lot of possibility for different skill builds. The only problem with skells in combat is that it can feel a little slow in comparison to ground gameplay, but honestly the feeling of it is so good it doesn't bother me that much. While they are 2 very different beasts, I actually prefer the skells to the Ouroboros forms in 3. The skells are more customizable and are more fun to use for me. I really look forward to how they improve skells in X2. With that being said, now's about time we move on to the spoilers section, and the biggest criticisms against this game, so if you want to avoid that, skip to here or click the link to the last chapter in the description. I should also note there will be spoilers for other games in this series as well, so if you haven't beaten Xenoblades 1 and 3 specifically, I'd recommend backing out now. With all that said, let's finally get into it. Alright, so let's get this one out of the way right now. Luxar is probably the most pathetic excuse for a villain I've ever seen. Like, he's so bad that the only singular villain in this entire series that I think is probably worse is Galgar. Zanza may suck as both a villain and character, but at the very least he's a fantastic element of the story. And while the only positive thing I can say about Zed is he has a good design, and he's arguably good symbolically, he at the very least manages to be threatening. All of which are things Luxar lacks. All he does is stand in his quarters staring at what I think is his idol to the Great One and occasionally give orders. As a big bad, he doesn't actually do much of anything. Zed has a similar issue, but at least with Zed he, unfortunately, has a perfectly justifiable reason for not being an active player. To make a long story short, from Zed's perspective, he has no reason to be scared of the main heroes. He's incredibly powerful and has nearly the entire deck in his hand, with the exception of the Queen of Cats. Heck, also unlike Zed, there's not a single person in Luxar's army that either likes or respects him. Frankly, any one of these people would probably make a better leader than him, and every other Ganglion member's character doesn't extend beyond them being here for eye candy. That being said though, the Ganglion as a whole I like more than the Mobius. I will always praise N as like the one good villain in 3 beyond maybe J, but comparatively, the Ganglion feel less half-baked as an idea. The problem with the Mobius is that, as a group, it feels like the only thing they have to offer to 3's story is they're pretty much the entire reason the plot is happening, and their symbolism. The idea of Mobius X, Y, and Z being living concepts made out of the fears and desires of those aboard Origin is really cool, but they never go further than that. At least with the Ganglion and possibly the Samar Federation as a whole, we know more about where they come from and why, and their beef with humanity is actually pretty interesting. Throughout the game, they called humanity a disease for some reason, and the explanation behind this is that human DNA is extraordinarily lethal to them, since humans are the descendants of the Ganglion's creators, so for as generic as their current villains are, they're a more interesting and better explored group. It also helps that there's clearly more to their story that will be explored later, which actually brings me to the story itself, and yeah, it's unfortunately a little undercooked. From a little story and world building it has, I gotta say, I was pretty interested, and still am, but this game really needed an extra 2 or 3 chapters. I mean, the story doesn't really start until like chapter 6 or 7, and even then, not a ton happens. The most story we really get is in chapters 11 and 12, with the revelation about how the Lifehold works, and how the Project Exodus selection process went. Then there's Elma's revelation at the end about how there's something very wrong with the planet they crashed on, but I feel like that should have been brought up more given that the planet is auto-translating every sentient alien life form on it. Honestly, there's really not much to say on it. I'm not sure exactly why the story is so lacking, because it genuinely seems as though they have a really good idea for where they want the story to go. Back in the day, I was pretty disappointed by this, and while I think I still am because I'm genuinely interested in seeing more of this world, I came out of the game kind of okay with all that. The reason? Because this game is the first chapter in a greater story. While I'm sure it's still going to be a while before X2 happens, I know that someday they'll continue the story, and I eagerly look forward to that. And to be honest, I'm really glad we're ending this marathon on this note, because if I'm looking back on it, 3 really disappointed me. It had so much potential to be something more than what it was, but so much of that is wasted in how rushed the last 2 chapters are, and how poorly handled some elements of the story are. While I think a lot of my criticisms towards its story are valid, unfortunately I've come to the conclusion that 3's story is just not my thing. Not bad, just not for me, and I hate that chronologically, that's the note we're ending on. At the very least, I came out of this learning to love Xenoblade Chronicles X, so I guess it's not all bad then. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game that doesn't really get enough love, I feel. It's not exactly what I or anyone would call perfect, but it's got a lot to love about it, and has a really interesting world for what story the game does have. With 3 having been recently released, here's to hoping this game gets the definitive edition it deserves, because it's absolutely begging for one. Next time we return to the Xeno series, though, will be with the Xenosaga, and then after that, the Xenoblade 3 full DLC. Either that or one other thing I have in mind will probably be the next marathon I do, but that'll be a while since I'm saving those for something that, for my own sake, will hopefully happen really soon. Until then though, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.